afternoon, and we will get you away by the end of the school day. So welcome everyone to our afternoon session of our Designated Safeguarding Lead Network meeting. My name's Kat Morrison. I'm a Policy and Development Officer for North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I'll be taking you through the next couple of hours and introducing, we've got a wealth of guest speakers who have got lots of amazing information for you. So I will start off by just doing a little bit of housekeeping. As I've said, these sessions, we do record them, and it tends to be whichever one I make the least amount of mistakes on is the one that I edit down and then put on the YouTube channel, and we will share the recording and the slides with you once we finish the day. If I can ask that you keep your microphone on mute, it really does help with background noise. And if you are not presenting, turn your cameras off, please. As always, we will use the chat. So if you've got any questions for any of our presenters, please use the chat box and we'll pick those up as we go through the afternoon. And I will always kind of stay on hand for a few minutes at the end of the session, and I'll turn the recording off just in case there's anyone that wants to kind of ask any questions away from the session being recorded. In terms of accessing our presentation, as I've said, we will pop it on the YouTube channel if you just give me a couple of days to get it edited and uploaded, and we will send through the slide deck as a PDF and any additional resources that come through as part of the afternoon. If you do go on our YouTube channel, it's always helpful to like and subscribe, and then you'll get a notification when we do put new videos on, because we do put them on quite regularly now. And then once you've completed the course, you'll get a questionnaire sent through to you through NYES. That's just a little bit of feedback for us. If you complete that and send it back through, that will kind of lead to you obtaining the certificate of attendance. So we have a packed agenda, lots of information for you this afternoon. As I've already said, please don't worry, we are going to give a lot to you, but you will be able to kind of digest that afterwards when we've got the recording and the slide deck and the materials and things like that. So sit back and enjoy your afternoon. We're going to start off with Claire, who's going to join us and give us a whistle-stop tour of the Growing Up in North Yorkshire survey findings. Then we've got Lynn Wester, who's going to give us an overview of reducing parental conflict. Myself and Hannah will give you some business unit updates from the partnership, and then Steph will be looking at the harmful sexual behaviour work. Helen Ingle will give us a brief update around the poverty proofing work, and then we'll finish with Leslie Gray giving us a prevent update as well. So that's enough from me in terms of introductions. I will hand over to Claire to start you off with the Growing Up in North Yorkshire survey. Thanks, Claire.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Barrowman, Health and Wellbeing Advisor with the School Improvement Team. I recognise many names on the call, which is lovely. So I support schools particularly around the planned PSHE curriculum, co-lead the Healthy and Early Years Award, and also do a lot of the Growing Up in North Yorkshire survey work. So thank you to all the schools that took part in the survey in 2024. For those of you that are familiar with the survey, we do it every 2 years with our target groups in particular, which are Year 2, Year 6, Year 8, Year 10, and now Year 12 pupils as well. So biannually doing that survey, it gives us a wealth of data on a county level, an area level, and also hopefully for you as a school individually. If your school took part, you'll see on the next slide the kind of areas that are included in the Growing Up in North Yorkshire survey. So from a safeguarding point of view, it gives you an absolute wealth of data from looking with that sort of safeguarding lens. So the sort of school culture, that sort of sense of belonging and feeling valued at school, being healthy, feeling safe, the emotional health and wellbeing, internet safety, and risk-taking behaviours, obviously asked in age-appropriate ways depending on the age of the child. So if your school did take part and you haven't seen your individual school report, I would particularly recommend that you do that. What I'm doing today is going to present the kind of overview from the county report. So it is the perception from quite a lot of our children in North Yorkshire. So the next slide will show you that we do have the county report, and we still do have the area reports available as well. So they're accessible on the Healthy Schools website. So even if your school didn't take part, you could still look at the county and or the area report for where your school or setting is. So you'll see from the next one that we did have slight decrease in primary school pupils taking part, but an increase in our secondary schools, and an increase again for our year 12 pupils taking part. But you'll see it's a good amount of pupils in North Yorkshire, so that pupil perception and what we're kind of engaging with is really, really important for us, and it's used across many services and to steer many a conversation. So what I aim to do with this presentation is just give you kind of really headline overview data. I have, after each section, put some slides in that signpost you to support or sort of more information about some of the priority areas. I'm not going to have time to go through those support slides, so please do look at them and digest them after this session. And if anybody's got any questions or queries, you can always come back to me. So the aspects that I'm going to focus in on are, on the next slide, you'll see that there are priorities from what we had from the 2022 survey. So that kind of emotional health and wellbeing, healthy lifestyles, online safety, etc. So I'm going to go through kind of data from the 2024 survey, looking at some of those priorities that we had from 2022 to see kind of direction of travel. On each of the slides, you will see that where possible, I have highlighted data as yellow, red, amber, or green, really. This is not any statistical difference. It's just to show a kind of direction of travel. If we're moving positively in a way from the 2022 survey data, or if we're moving in a sort of more negative way from the 2022 survey. So please be mindful, it's not statistically different. So if we could just bob on a couple of slides, Kat, that would be great. So starting with emotional health and wellbeing, I know this has been a key priority for a lot of us, and we're starting to see some green shoots, we hope. So the next slide will show you the data from our year 2 and our year 6 pupils. So we asked them about year 2, about what they sort of worry about and how often they worry. And you'll see from the green that we've got less year 2 pupils worrying. Worrying about their families has always kind of been the top response. So we've seen a sort of reduction in worrying about that, and also worry about the way they look has always had a sort of high percentage, and that again is starting to reduce. And you'll see that is continuing into year 6. So we've got less pupils worrying about a range of different aspects. So that's positive, and as I said, some of those sort of green shoots around that. As part of the survey, we do also ask about resilience and well-being. So the next slide will show you, we don't ask, are you resilient, are you well? We ask a series of questions and we correlate the responses back together to give an overall score for resilience and an overall score for well-being. So you'll see from the year 6 data, again, we're starting to have some of those hopefully green positive shoots, that we've got an increase in children in year 6 who've got that high measure of resilience, which is what we're aiming for. And then we've got a higher percentage with a high or maximum score on the children's wellbeing scale. So again, some positives, and I appreciate that schools have done a lot around that emotional health and wellbeing support. Our data was dipping before COVID, but it really dipped during COVID. So hopefully we're starting to see some of that increase, positive increase, particularly for primary. Not quite as positive for our secondaries data. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see that we've got an increase in pupils still reporting that low measure of resilience. And the wellbeing score, but on the wellbeing score on the next slide, you will see that we have got slight positive increases in pupils reporting sort of better well-being, which again is a positive. but there is a definite difference between our boys and girls. So on the next slide, I've pulled together the resilience data and the wellbeing scores for year 6, year 8 and year 10 pupils, but done it sort of as boys and girls. So if I just take, for example, the year 10 boys and the year 10 girls, with a high measure of resilience, we've got 6% of girls and 13% of boys, and a high wellbeing score, we've got 9% for girls, but 28% for boys. So I think some of those green shoots seem to be particularly coming from our boys, which is good. We want that, but why is it perhaps not working so much for our girls? What do we need to reflect on and think around that? And obviously keep it going for our boys. So as I said, this data is kind of food for thought, and we may not all have the answers, but it's aspects for us to start to consider and work through and think about. And then the next slide, just sort of around that emotional health and wellbeing, we were seeing that increase around, particularly kind of around eating disorders. We've had an increase in referrals to our eating disorder services, and some young people at the really sort of crisis point because they've been sort of hiding their eating disorder. So again, we've put training and support in for schools, so it's good to see that percentage is starting to come down, but I appreciate that is still 39%, for our young people around that. The next slide is around sort of self-harm and suicidal thoughts, which I appreciate is a sensitive slide. And within the survey, we considered long and hard whether to include these questions. But as partners, we felt it was really important because data was indicating that this was kind of increasing and something that we needed to get kind of baseline on. So this is the second year that we've included these questions, and there's a lot of support within the survey around these for the young people, signposting them as well. So again, you can see in the main that we have got some positive direction of travel, in that we've got less young people. It's not massive differences, but it is starting to, for the majority of our young people, but not so for our year 12s. So again, thinking about if you've got a sixth form, just be mindful of that, continuing that sort of pastoral support for our year 12 pupils. And then on the next slide, so if young people have thought about harming themselves or sort of suicidal intentions, then we asked those pupils, did you tell anybody, or did you or did they not feel they needed any support? There were other responses, but I've just particularly pulled out these two responses. So again, you'll see there's a bit of a mix. Majority of young people are moving in the direction of they are telling people, and they did feel that they needed support. But our year 8s there, not much movement for them, and our year 10 girls as well. So again, just thinking about that sort of targeting of support and signposting, just being sort of mindful of that. And then the next slide, we know that having a safe adult to talk to for any child is a really protective factor. So, we asked this of all our year groups. So hopefully the next slide will show you that. So we'll show you the percentage of pupils who have reported that they have a safe, trusted adult to talk to if they're sort of worried about something. So you'll see that it starts off quite high for our year 2s and then drops down, particularly sort of that shift to secondary school, which is when perhaps they're starting to engage in some more risky behaviours or having a bit more sort of worries. So again, that year 8, I think, from the previous slide, they were perhaps not seeking support, and they're, quite low again, sort of for not saying they have that sort of trusted adult, and again for year 10, and then it sort of rises up again. So again, just for our secondary colleagues, just being kind of mindful of that, and I think that sort of move from primary to secondary is definitely something we need to sort of think about. The next few slides have, as I said, those links to resources and sort of signposting, so hopefully you can have some sort of chance to look through them after. But just to pause on the NSPCC Building Connection Service. This is a new service the NSPCC have implemented because they've identified that quite a lot of our young people are experiencing loneliness. So they have produced their Building Connection Service, which is aimed at children who are aged 9 to 19. And schools can make a referral for this service with parental consent, and the young person then accesses a number of online sessions with an NSPCC worker to work through some of those kind of aspects. I have put a link to where you can find out more and what the service is particularly focusing on and what the steps are that a young person would go through. But as I said, it's a new service, free to access. So it's something that you may want to look at a little bit further to be able to offer that support to our young people. So the next one is around online safety. So the first table, I've just pulled together some key questions and kind of what the responses have been across the sort of different year groups. And in purple, I've just sort of pulled out some that, again, I think we just need to kind of reflect on and think about. So our year 2 pupils, we've got quite a high percentage who've got technology in their bedroom after they go to bed, probably unsupervised. And the TV, you know, probably a smart TV, so they connect YouTube, etc., etc. And 24% of our year 2 pupils saying they communicate online with people they don't know. It's mainly our boys, mainly through gaming. So that's a really vulnerable group of year 2 pupils. So thinking about that sort of healthy bedtime routine, the importance of sleep, but also that sort of lack of supervision around technology. We know that unsupervised children in their bedrooms is a real sort of safeguarding risk. So something to particularly sort of flag up there. They're being bullied online. We know the mental health impact of that for our young people, 24 hours, 7 days a week, and then them having to manage that. You know, we've seen some of that play out in some very tragic cases. So again, being really mindful of that. And then I think for our year 6s, seeing sexually explicit images, received a semi-nude or nude photo, been approached by an adult who wanted a sexual encounter. You know, are we preparing our year 6s perhaps for some of those situations and scenarios through that PSHE work? So things like the NSPCC PANTS work, you know, some of those building blocks, and then sort of building on that learning as they move through the school. So just being mindful of that for our sort of, you know, upper Key Stage 2 pupils. So the next slide is just a little bit more sort of detail, really. So you can see that year 2s having friends online that they don't know in real life, as I said, but particularly the boys, and that has increased from the 2022 survey, whereas others have possibly, you know, sort of come down, like for our year 6s. So it may be, I know a lot of schools have done around online safety. It's maybe we just need to think and reflect on that and think about that curriculum content for our younger pupils as well. Fake news comes out for primary and secondary. You know, are we giving them those critical thinking skills? Are we talking to them about that kind of fake news in the online world? The secondary, again, some positives in sort of direction of travel, really. You'll see that there's quite a lot of green. So, you know, I know a lot of you have worked really hard in giving our secondary pupils those online sort of knowledge and skills and understanding, and pupils being able to sort of manage some of those safeguarding risks. So the next slide as well sort of shows some of those continued kind of green responses, really. So that's really, really positive. You know, say that direction of travel, particularly for our secondaries, I think is good. And also we asked them about being able to block, and a lot of them, you know, knew what that was and how to do that. So that's really, really positive. And then, as I said, there is a resource page, if we keep going, sort of links to, again, various sort of support and information. Project Evolve is really good if you haven't discovered it already. It's a wealth of teaching resources, whatever the age, whatever the topic. It'll have a resource that covers it. So really worth tapping in if you are looking at your skill data and thinking, oh, we need to enhance our curriculum around some of these aspects. So just moving on to looking at sort of bullying and negative behaviours. Unfortunately, this is where we start to see sort of more reds, really. And this is a change for us because our sort of bullying data hasn't really shifted for the last sort of 4 surveys. So year 2s, we've got an increase in them feeling safe at school and not feeling scared to be at school because the children most of the time. But then you'll see year 6s, 23% of pupils said they've been bullied at or near school in the last 12 months. And that's a jump up from 21%. It's been 21%, I think, about the last 4 or 5 surveys. So that is sort of quite a shift for us. And also that pupils are perhaps thinking that schools are not taking bullying seriously or dealing with bullying quite or very well from their perspective. And this continues into our secondary schools as well. So again, we've got an increase in pupils who said that they've been bullied at or near school. And that's the same for some of our year 12s as well. A drop in percentage of pupils who think their school deals with bullying quite well. An increase in those who think they're being sort of pushed or hit or sort of picked on. An increase who say they've been a victim of violence or aggression in the area where they live. And 8% of pupils said that they've carried weapons when going out at least sometimes. So it's the slides with the most red on for sort of direction of travel. And I think that sort of feeling of feeling safe at school, feeling a sense of belonging, feeling valued, feeling connected to their school is something that we need to think about and reflect on, and possibly some of those links around attendance as well. That children need to feel safe and that they belong at school. So again, it's sort of presenting some of those food for thought aspects. Also to highlight, and you'll be able to see a little bit more of this in the county report, but for our secondary school, our year 6 and our secondary school pupils, we did ask children if they were a young carer or free school meals, etc. So on the next slide, you will see I've just pulled out they're being bullied at or near school in the last 12 months. So the ones that are in green is a response from sort of the boys in year 8. They are lower than the average of pupils who say that they've been bullied in that year group. So the ones in green are the same or lower than the average for that year group. All the others are higher percentage who say that they've been bullied at or near school in the last 12 months. And there's more information about those different social identity groups in the county report. But for our sort of transgender young people, 60% year 8, year 10 say that they've been bullied at or near school. Really difficult for them to manage that on a sort of daily basis. So being mindful of some of those groups of young people as well. Next slide talks about sort of sexual harassment. We've asked this for the last couple of years and started to see a bit of a drop. So you'll have that data for your own school. But I think really interestingly on the next slide, we asked pupils in year 6 and year 8 and year 10, if you've been bullied at school, did you tell an adult? 7% didn't. And various reasons. Snitch is a really sort of one that comes out quite a lot. But from our secondary school pupils, 53% who've experienced or witnessed sexual harassment said that they still didn't report it to an adult at school. So there's still something there, for us as adults to think about how children, that safeguarding aspect, how they disclose, how they report, and their safety in doing that is really important. There's a lot of evidence around sort of promoting active bystanders, upstanders, being an ally. There's a lot of sort of research coming out how sort of a whole school approach to that can have a really positive impact about sort of against negative behaviours. So that might be something that schools kind of want to look into. Substances, I think my kind of key message here is thinking about the substance education that you provide, and is it still sort of fit for purpose in what young people are choosing if they're going to choose to use a substance. So for primary schools data, just a very slight increase in pupils said that they've had an alcoholic drink in the last sort of 7 days. And percentage who know someone who uses drugs in their area, but we have got 5% of young people in year 6 using vapes, and I know some of you have contacted me around that. So again, just putting that sort of emphasis onto the substances that young people are using. And in secondary, the data will show again that we've got that sort of higher percentage who are vaping. We've also thinking about if they choose to take an illegal substance, which is 7%, but the sort of edibles, cannabis edibles, is kind of increased in use in that. So it's sort of in sweets or cookies or things. And we also ask about Cali pens and snus, which is on the next slide. So you'll see that we've got an increase of young people who are using a Cali pen, which is like a vape with CBD oil in it, and snus, which is a nicotine pouch. So again, so thinking about the time sort of within your curriculum, you know, are you focusing on some of the substances that our young people are sort of now using? And the indication is on snus, which is a nicotine pouch, that it is more boys, because apparently a lot of famous footballers use it. So that might be sort of an influencing factor there. So the next few slides have a little bit more information about what a Cali pen is, what a snus is, where you can get information from our North Yorkshire Drug Hub, and then vaping. Common question to me. There's a couple of links to some supporting resources around vaping education in schools. So healthy lifestyles, just bringing it to a close, we've got just particularly, I think, those young people who are choosing or aren't able to have breakfast before they arrive at school. So on the next slide, we've got slight increase in year 6 pupils not having anything to eat or drink before breakfast. Quite a big increase in our secondary pupils, and then year 12 it's sort of 30%, and then some might be the same children not having sort of school lunches, so sort of that cohort of pupils who might be sort of hungry. And I know there's more work around breakfast clubs, so again that might be something to kind of think about. And then just for our sort of secondary colleagues, we do ask around sexual health and say you'll have this information for your pupils. So again, we have less young people in sexual relationships, but still lowish percentages of knowing where to sort of access sexual health services, free condoms, etc. And we do ask, have they experienced some unhealthy behaviours in their own relationships? So again, you will have that data, but if you're thinking about that sort of work around healthy relationships, then that data is there for you, an example of which is on the next slide. And then just a reminder for our secondary colleagues that the Your Sexual Health team are offering sessions in secondary schools to promote the Your Sexual Health team and things. So there is a little bit of info for you there. And then the next few slides just cover the PSHE lessons. So really positive for year 2 and year 6 that we've got that increase from 2022 in pupils finding these lessons useful. Not quite so positive for our year 8 and year 10 pupils, but it is for our year 12. And that's because I know a lot of our secondaries didn't necessarily have a planned PSHE curriculum for year 12, which has now been implemented. We're just wondering whether year 8 and year 10, it's because year 6 primary schools have sort of really increased their PSHE provision, whether we're actually following through on that learning for our secondaries. It's just something for us to kind of think about. So going forward, priorities for 2024 will continue to be emotional health and wellbeing, that kind of accessing services, a trusted adult, online safety, particularly perhaps our younger pupils, year 2s, healthy bedtime routine, healthy lifestyles, some of that aspect about vapes and other kind of emerging substances, and that sort of safe, feeling safe in school, and kind of bullying behaviours as well. And then the slides after the priorities is just a link to a range of training that I provide in relation to the sort of planned PSHE curriculum, being an effective PSHE subject lead. I do also still run the termly PSHE network meetings, which are free for all of North Yorkshire schools to access, primary, secondary and special. So there is a wealth of support and resources available to tap into around some of these key aspects. I appreciate that was a lot of information, but hopefully that's given you some of that sort of headline data, which is hopeful and just helps you sort of have a little bit of a reflect on what our young people are telling us in North Yorkshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That is so fascinating, all that data, and like I say, you do so well to whistle stop through it all and cover all the main headlines. Just to kind of let everyone know, we will be holding a learning event on Wednesday lunchtime, one of our usual monthly sessions, and Claire has that session this Wednesday, so we'll be going over the data in a little bit more detail. She'll have an hour with us, and again, that will be a session that's recorded, so hopefully a useful resource to kind of go back and use with your teams in terms of reflecting on some of that data. But yeah, thank you very much, Claire. Lynn, I'm going to hand over to you, who's going to do the next session on reducing parental conflict.
Hello there. Well, thank you for inviting me to present today. So I'm Linda West. I'm generally known as Lynn, and I am the lead for reducing parental conflict with North Yorkshire. Can I have my next slide, Cal? Can I move them on? So today's session will include looking at North Yorkshire's parental conflict programme. North Yorkshire are part of the DWP Challenge Fund, or Challenge Grant Fund, to set up a reducing parental conflict programme to raise awareness both with professionals and also with our workforce of the need to reduce parental conflict to better the outcomes for children. I'll give you a definition of what is parental conflict. I'll talk to you about why it's important that we raise awareness for parental conflict and for children's outcome, as the biggest influence on children is their parents, and the quality of that interparental relationship directly affects how children feel. We're not talking about domestic abuse. Parental conflict is different, and I'll give you those distinct differences. I'll also discuss how we're going to keep reducing parental conflict on the agenda going forward. Can I have my next slide, please, Kat? So just an aside from me, if you do have any reflections as I'm going through my session, please write them in the chat and I'll happily sort of look at them at the end, or perhaps answer any questions that anybody might have. When I'm talking about parents, I'm using the term parents as a catch-all for all types of relationships that children have with the people who parent them. So that could be biological parents, it could be carers, foster parents, adoptive parents. We could be looking at step parents. We could be looking at kingship carers, parents of the same sex. So I'm looking at it as a total area of who has that parental relationship with a child. So I just really wanted to make that clear, just in case you were thinking that I'm just literally talking about parents as being mum and dad. Can I have my next slide, please, Kat? So on your screen now is the definition of parental conflict as the DWP state it to be, which is that intense, frequent and poorly resolved conflict that happens. It is perfectly normal for all relationships to experience conflict at one time and another. What we're looking at with parental conflict is when that arguing moves from constructive to the destructive. That's when it starts to impact on children and it starts to make them feel anxious. The biggest influence on children is their parents. And recent research, the DWP, actually, they only presented it last week, to back up the fact that actually addressing parental conflict, which I'm sure you come across time and time again at the school gates, with conflict between parents that's impacting on children. Raising awareness, being curious about what's going on in that parental relationship will support families to manage their conflict in a more productive manner. So this is what I'm going to be talking to you about in the next few slides. I will, however, say that parental conflict is not domestic abuse. It sits below the domestic abuse thresholds. May I have the next slide, please, Kat? I'm going to show you a brief video. It's only a few minutes long. It was produced by the Early Intervention Foundation, which is now Just Foundations. And it probably explains far better than I can and far clearer than I can of what parental conflict is and how it impacts on families and how it's difficult for all services to be able to be effective if parental conflict isn't addressed. Could you play that for me, please, Kat?
Conflict between parents is normal, but if exposure is frequent, intense, and poorly resolved, this can have a damaging impact on children, resulting in long-term mental health issues and emotional, social, behavioural, and academic problems as they grow up. Today, there is a growing awareness of the importance of the quality of the relationship between parents, whether they are together or separated, and the need to tackle conflict in the best interests of children. There may be lots of services in your area that focus on parenting or the relationship between parents and children, but the ability of these services to help children is likely to be reduced if damaging parental conflict is left unresolved. This is a problem if it means that important local services and programs aren't equipped to improve children's lives in the way we all want them to. Many practitioners and services working at the front line lack the confidence, tools and knowledge to identify and support families where damaging conflict is going on. Many parents only seek help when conflict reaches crisis point. And many families experiencing poverty or financial stress, who are at a greater risk of experiencing damaging conflict, are less likely to get access to vital support. Early intervention to reduce the impact of parental conflict needs to be at the heart of services, to improve outcomes for children and improve the effectiveness of other family support. We can help you to shape these services in your area. Visit our website to find out more.
As I said, I think that depicts really well how difficult it is for services to be effective when parental conflict exists. And what we're doing in North Yorkshire with our Reducing Parental Conflict programme is supporting our practitioners to have the confidence to have those conversations with parents about what is going on in their relationships when things become stressful. Just as simply as if they're struggling with a child's behaviour, that sounds very stressful. How are you coping? How are you managing to be able to communicate with your partner when things are this difficult? We've been very successful, and I will go on later in my session to sort of tell you what we've done to manage to get to this stage. On your screen now are some stats which you've probably already read, but this is why it is so important to look at the quality of parental relationships. When frequent, intense arguing is happening within the family home and the children are subject to this environment, this toxic environment that can sometimes build up in families, when arguments are frequently repeated again and again, there's no positive resolution. There's no warmth in the parental relationship. Now that can happen whether parents are together or whether a parent is separated. But as you can see, the increase in homelessness, being known to the police, perhaps spending time in prison, educational underachievement. It's very difficult, as we'll go on to see when another short video that I will show you later. It's very difficult for children to concentrate if they're very concerned about what is going on at home, and that is impacting on how they feel if they're anxious. As the previous presenter said, it can increase substance misuse. It can lead to teenage pregnancy. It can affect mental health, and it can lead to debt and possibility of being on benefits in the future. So these are just some of the impacts that it has in the future. You just put the next bit up for me. So although these statistics are from 2019, they're still used by the DWP today, and they are still very relevant as to the outcomes of parental conflict on children's futures. And that is why we've spent the last 4-5 years working with the DWP and using their grant funding to raise this awareness within our workforce. Can I have my next slide, please? So, what are the triggers? Well, the triggers are all the things that happen to us in this life. So whether it's issues that we have with work, whether we're worried about money, whether we have the arrival of a newborn baby, all of these things that you see on your screen will add added pressure to families. And when families become stressed, and when parents become stressed, they might lose the ability to communicate with each other. It can reduce parenting capacity. The focus becomes more on the issue that's at hand, be it a health condition perhaps of the child or the parent, or perhaps there's some addiction in terms of gambling or substance misuse. When the focus becomes on that, the focus is no longer on the child, and the child is left to work their way through these very toxic arguments that are happening between parents. That would obviously lead parents not to be able to work together. Could I have my next slide, please, Kat? So leading on from that, with all the stresses that happen in normal everyday life that can sometimes overload parents and lead to this intercouple parental conflict, which is on the relationship continuum, is right in the middle there. And that's where we tend to sit when we do this work. So you've got a respectful, equal, cooperative and happy relationship. A child is going to have a good experience of conflict resolution. They're going to see warmth between their parents, even though there might be disagreements or arguing. They'll see a mutual respect, and they'll see a level of emotional control. As we're moving along the continuum to where we start to come in when we recognise parental conflict, we'll start to see that conflict, excuse me, is becoming very frequent. It gets very intense. Parents lose the ability to be able to find those positive resolutions, and this is where children are particularly affected. They might start to feel isolated. It's a toxic atmosphere at home. They might not want to be in the home. They might decide, actually, I'm going to go round to my friend's house, or I'm not going to go home tonight at all because I just can't manage what's going on between my parents. What we have done really successfully in North Yorkshire is build the confidence of our workforce so that they understand the difference between what is parental conflict, this intense arguing that the parents are finding very difficult to resolve, to domestic abuse, which is something very different. So there's a clear abuser with domestic abuse, and children will become at significant harm. But I think my next slide shows much more clearly a very simplistic difference between the two. So when we're talking about parental conflict, as I've said, these frequent arguing, lack of communication, but there is no physical violence, and one parent is not frightened of the other parent. With domestic abuse, there's that imbalance of power that you see. We might see one parent or partner fearful of the other, and it may all include all of the aspects of violence, intimidation, threats, abuse, both sexual, financial, and harassment. So hopefully that gives you a very clear picture of the difference between the two. What I would say is that parental conflict is more issue-based. So it's around one of those stresses that we saw earlier, whether that's the arrival of a newborn baby or perhaps financial issues that might be happening. Domestic abuse is about power and control. Have my next slide, please, Kat. So what's the impact? Well, the impact you might see every day in your settings. You might see a child that is withdrawn, sad, doesn't really want to participate, looking anxious, looking worried. You might see acting out. You might see them having difficult relationships with their peer groups, finding it very difficult to find a resolution to their own conflicts. You might find that a child discloses actually that they may become somewhat of a counsellor to their parent or parents. They may be finding excuses for what's going on at home, and they may be caring for their siblings. I have actually got a short video for you to watch, which explains the impact of parental conflict, that intense arguing on children, from the voice of children. Just have my next slide, please, Kat. So this video was produced by Dudley, who have kindly given permission for all of the local authorities who are part of the DWP funding challenge grant to use. And it's an excellent video from the voice of children of what it feels like to live when your parents are not getting on to the level that it's frequent, it's very intense. Could you play the video for me, Kat, please?
They say why they always argue about why one of them has more money than each other.
And does one want more money or what?
One wants more money, and the one who's got all the money doesn't give, only gives a little bit to my grandma. Well, once they were shouting, and it was really loud, and that our road is really long, and we were on one side having a walk, and then they started having an argument, and then they started shouting, and the people from the other side of the street could hear it. They were so loud. They were arguing in the kitchen, and I went in the front room and I sat on my dad's chair, and I was all curled up crying because I was upset. Sometimes it's not very good because they shout all day, and really I can't do my homework at school from St. Peter's Anna Jane, and I can't do anything because they're shouting. Well, I just feel inside like a frost is coming inside, and everything's going wrong in the world. And then when they make up, then it feels like it's all coming back, and all the summer's coming back. If you're all, of course, arguing all the time, the children might get it in their minds and start doing it at school and doing it to their friends, and then have no friends. And then when they grow up and get married, they might start doing it thinking, this is what my mum and dad did, why don't I do it? Or if, say, the mum and dad argue, they split up, the child would think, well, that's the first idea, I'll split up then with my husband when I'm older. So it's not good to have arguments all the time, but I think now and then to learn what you're doing and see what you shouldn't do. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel worried. It feels really scary, like they're going to break up and one's going to go that side and one's going to go that side. So I don't know who to choose to go with because I love both of them very much. So I don't really like them shouting. It scares me a lot. Crying like this.
I think that from the mouth of children actually explains what it's like to live in a household that's got this level of conflict going on. One of the things that I would say is that, so I'm sorry, I'm just going to put my headphones in. I do apologise. My little dog has suddenly decided to bark. Can you still hear me? Could you give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me? Kat, could you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Lynn. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, the video I think depicts really well what it's like for children to live in a household that is experiencing this level of conflict. I particularly like the little girl who says that it feels like a frost that's coming in, and then when the arguing stops, it feels like summer has returned. That for me just sums up what it must feel like for a child, and the insightfulness of the older child who is telling us that actually this is what's being role modeled to me. This is how I might decide to act when I'm older. So being curious about relationships, which is what we want practitioners to do, be curious about what's going on in relationships, to support families and to signpost them to help when they are struggling, when they're struggling to communicate, when arguing is impacting on their ability to parent the way that they would want to. I'm a trained mediator, and over my years of mediation, I don't know how many times I've heard from parents that our children know nothing about what is going on within our relationship. We keep it all from them. They have no idea. However, when I speak to the children, they can tell me exactly what's going on, which I think that video depicts really, really well. So what have North Yorkshire done and what are our next steps? So we have trained a vast number of our workforce in level 1 and level 2 parental conflict, giving them an understanding of what frequent, intense and poorly resolved arguing will look like and the impact of children. We have also trained up to 24 relationship champions. 18 of those are currently active, and they're trained to support their colleagues when they are trying to manage these difficult relationships in the families that they are working with, offering advice, support and guidance. The relationship champions are also trained in the parenting apart intervention. And that is a very intense, short 4-week program that practitioners can use to focus on the issues. So to give parents time to understand what the issues are that are causing the conflict, how that might be impacting on their children. So we might show them videos like the one I showed you earlier for the Dudley video. We make time for them to listen to each other and understand each other's perspective. They may not agree, but actually they can listen and understand. And it's time and space that we can craft a solution that neither parent might be entirely happy with, but it might be a solution to some of the issues that they have that both parents can live with. As part of our Reducing Parental Conflict toolkits, we've given our practitioners 5 key questions to be curious and help them explore with parents what might be going on with their relationships, to give them that time to think about their relationship, what's happening, how are they working together, how are they able to make decisions jointly for their children, and how any conflict may be impacting on their children. And that's been adopted as part of our early help assessment across the board. We've also developed drop-in sessions for the whole of children's social care, for practitioners to come along with any of the families that they are working with, so that they can be offered advice, support and guidance for the next steps with the families that they are working with. So we're using our experience and learning together what interventions, what tools will actually work, or trying different options of tools and strategies. Have my next slide, please, Kat. So on your screen now is a list of resources that I want to highlight to you, that you could signpost parents to get that support. So North Yorkshire, along with 13 other local authorities, have come together to build the Relationship Matters website. That is actually where you'll find the Dudley video that I showed you earlier. There is a great deal of resources on there for both parents and practitioners to help them understand parental conflict and its impact on children, and how they might want to do things differently. I've also put up there the See It Differently website, which is an excellent website again, because it will actually show parents how one of the intense arguing develops, that's perhaps repeated and repeated, but takes them out of that argument and allows them to see the argument from different perspectives, and gives them an idea of how they could change their own behaviour so that things work out differently. There is a massive amount of information on the Reducing Parental Conflict government site. I would strongly suggest that you go and have a look at some of that information, which is very informative. The Click Relationships, again, has many resources for practitioners and parents that you can choose to look at together or signpost parents to. And I'm going to give out a shout out to our training that's on the Learning Zone and the NYES site for how to have difficult conversations with parents. I was pleased and delighted to hear that from this morning's session. As a result of the session, somebody had gone and found that training and actually booked themselves on it, which is really good news. It's very difficult to start those conversations with parents, and I can imagine that being at the school gate, listening to parents and some of the difficulties they have, how do you start that conversation? It might be as simple as, how are you getting on with your partner as a result of this? It sounds very stressful. It sounds very difficult. I've also put up the Relate website there. Although you may have heard that Relate is currently in administration, they still have their website is still active, and they still have these AI tools available for parents. I've interrogated them thoroughly, and they give some really fantastic advice, guidance, and signpost parents. Particularly the one in the middle bot, that offers really good insights to parents, and parents can question what might be happening for their child when they're experiencing such levels of difficulties in their relationship with their partner. My next slide, please. Well, that's the end of my session. I do have some time for questions if you'd like to ask me any questions, but my contact details are up there. If you'd like any further information, I invite you to contact me. Is there anything in the chat, Kat?
No, nothing in the chat at the minute, Lynn. We will move on so we don't run over like we did this morning. But if you want to stick around for a couple of minutes and just see if anything does come up in the chat. But Yeah,
No
huge
worries.
thank you. It's such a fascinating subject, and like I say, I think probably one that will resonate with most of the people in this room, and something that's very common. And that video gets me every time. It's
Yeah,
such a powerful video.
it is a powerful video, isn't it? No problem.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. We will move on with the afternoon, and we are going to spend the next section just giving you a little bit of an update from the business unit, just some of our key sort of safeguarding headlines, really. So I'll start off just in relation to some national and local learning updates. So there have been some key national documents that have been released over recent months. Worth noting, what we've started to do now is we've collated all this information on the NYSCP webpage. So we've got a dedicated page now on the site which summarises these kind of national documents that come out. I've popped a QR code on the slide so you can scan and access it quite quickly. But we're just conscious that these documents that come out, they're often 100+ pages long, and we know that people, it's a challenge to kind of find the time to kind of look at those and digest them properly. So just to try and assist with that, we are either providing our own summaries of the document or sharing national summaries that have been put together and just looking at what those look like from a North Yorkshire context, really. So just, I won't go through all of these, but you can see this kind of gives you a summary of some of those key ones that we have on there. But just to touch on some of them that are probably worth noting at the minute, Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive. This was released pre-Christmas, and it is a policy statement setting out the government's commitment to a whole system reform of children's social care, keeping families together and keeping children safe. So a couple of things that it kind of mentions of note, there was quite a lot in the document, but there's proposals such as the need for a single unique identifier for children, and that will improve the sharing of information between agencies. There's further strengthening of multi-agency child protection, and an additional proposal that if a child is subject to a child protection plan, parents or carers would need to have local authority consent to move forward with elective home education. But obviously, these are proposal papers, so when things look to change in terms of policy or procedure, just to kind of make you aware that as a partnership, we will make sure that information is delivered to you as soon as we can, and it will be as clear as we can share it, really. Again, not a new report. We know this one was published in October 2022, but worth noting about the ICSA child sexual abuse document that came out. It does seem to have had quite a lot of media coverage in the start of the year, as the government have set out some of the actions they plan to take on and some of the actions from the inquiry. So of note, of course, is the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse. And again, we'll share those details with you when they come through. Another one I just wanted to share, because I think there's some quite interesting local sort of context to this one as well. We had the National County Line Strategic Risk Assessment document. This was released the back end of 2024, which kind of sort of shares some key messages and themes and trends around child criminal exploitation and county lines. But what we're seeing particularly is the trend that the county lines model is becoming more localised. So previously we would see typically young people moving longer distances to be exploited. It's in the name, you know, people sometimes think it means you're moving across county when actually you can move shorter distances. But those longer distances resulted in children going missing for longer periods of time. And as such, that was kind of more easily recognised. What we're now seeing is a more localised model of criminal exploitation nationally, and we're keeping an eye on this from a local perspective as well. But we're seeing children moving shorter distances, often within county, and this can mean that they are missing for shorter periods of time, so hours rather than days. And this may not be being recognised as exploitation by partners. So I have done a briefing on this, and I have put it on the YouTube channel. But again, it's just something to be really mindful of when we're thinking about those really early indicators of child exploitation. And if we've got a young person who we're not sure about their whereabouts for a couple of hours, are we considering that as a missing young person and someone who is potentially at risk? So something to have a think about there. Another one I just wanted to touch on, because it draws on some of our local learning as well, that we will get onto in a couple of slides, is a document called I Wanted Them All to Notice. So this was produced by the Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, and it looks at protecting children and responding to child sexual abuse within the family environment. So this draws on learning from serious case reviews and rapid reviews nationally, not just North Yorkshire cases. But some of the key findings are in relation to really hearing the voice of the child and understanding their needs. So not just relying on what a child is directly telling you, or if they disclose something that's directly happening. It's about exploring the concept of the voice of the child and how that voice is displayed, not necessarily through direct words, but is it displayed through what a child is not saying, how a child is behaving, and really kind of taking into consideration those children who may not be able to communicate verbally as well. Another key point is to, really importantly, is when a young person does say something or make a disclosure, that young person is believed. What the review found was that often when there was a disclosure to a professional, there tended to be a bit of a tendency to kind of downplay what had been said, or to try and rationalise or justify or seek an explanation into what could have possibly happened to that young person that would not be sort of seen as abuse. And the report sort of takes note of really kind of looking at what that young person has said and believing what that young person has said and moving forward with actions as a result. A key part as well is the importance of taking into account a child and the parents' race, ethnicity and cultural background, and understanding cultural bias in how we respond to children and young people, and also kind of looking at understanding the context and vulnerabilities of those families, so domestic abuse and parental conflict, as Lynn's already talked about. But again, it's just, so, you know, some of those key messages are really around the need to identify signs and understand risk, and ensuring concerns are raised at the earliest opportunity. So it's a big document, and like I say, we've shared some of the summary and those key points, and it's really interesting, and Hannah will mention it in the next couple of slides. It's something that we've seen come through in some of our local learning as well. Locally, we try and promote our learning as much as possible, and we really do encourage partners to share these amongst teams. We have some learning from our local safeguarding practice review groups that are due to be published shortly, and like I say, Hannah's going to look at those. Currently on the website, our most recent one is in relation to Child V. And this was a case that looked at the tailoring of safe sleep messages for families. And again, going back to some of that professional curiosity and having some of those conversations with families rather than just delivering those messages. And hopefully you're all aware of the Ask Me campaign and the work that's been done around that. We also look at our learning themed audits, where we explore a particular safeguarding theme. Again, some really interesting learning. We did one of these on child exploitation last year. The report's on the website. And then over the next couple of weeks, we will have a report based on our most recent audit of young people who have gone missing from home and care. And then moving into the coming months, our next audits that we're currently in the process of starting is looking at parental substance use and mental health and the impact that has on children and young people. Hannah, if I can ask you to jump in and talk about Child A, B and AC.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. So just to provide everyone with a bit of context, so the Safeguarding Practice Review Group in North Yorkshire, you might also hear referenced as the SPRIG, is there to review serious incidents or cases where it's felt that there are opportunities for learning in order to support practice development, obviously with the idea that that ultimately has an impact on the lives of children. So the SPRIG reviewed a case known as Child AB. So that was a child not previously known to services who'd presented at their GP with lesions on their genitals. One explanation for these lesions is genital herpes. And genital herpes can be indicative of sexual harm. So throughout the review, what we found was that we wanted to have a bit more of a look at our strategy meetings. So to consider how information shared in these, to make sure that there's really clear roles and responsibilities and that all actions are kind of smart as a result of those meetings. We're also currently undergoing a review about the sexual abuse treatment pathways that children have access to in North Yorkshire. Kat just referenced the national panel's I Wanted Them to Notice report, and actually the case for child AB has been a useful thing for the partnership to think about in order that we can benchmark where North Yorkshire are working in terms of the recommendations that have been made in the I Wanted Them to Notice report. Again, that sort of helps us to feel confident that children who are at risk of sexual harm are receiving the right support at the right time, which is obviously in line with our practice model. Another case that we've reviewed recently was a child who we call AC, who was born prematurely at 25 weeks and sadly died at 3 months of age while an inpatient on a neonatal unit. At the time of AC's death, they were subject to an interim care order with care planning regs for placement with parent. The concerns for parents centred around mental health, substance use and domestic abuse. Something that came out strongly through that review was around us considering our language around the word engagement. So we're trying to move towards that idea that the responsibility for engagement sits with professionals rather than with the family. So we're thinking about how to sort of work that through. Another strong theme that came out in Child AC's review and in others that we've done is thinking about how parenting support can be tailored for parents who we either have a diagnosis or who are presenting with behaviours that might indicate that they're neurodiverse. So we're calling that How Neurodiverse Parents Parent. Thanks, Kat. We can't hear you, Kat, now.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
There we go. So just to give you a few headlines from a business unit point of view, I wanted to kind of get dates and diaries for you for our annual face-to-face DSL conference, which we will have on the 23rd of September back at the Pavilions in Harrogate. They're always amazing days, and certainly as a business unit, we love taking part in them. So please do get yourselves booked onto that. I think the booking link will be coming through from Enyes, and we will circulate it around to everybody so you can get onto that. While I'm kind of going over the next couple of slides, what I'd like you to do is just to consider and put in the chat if there are any particular themes or trends or topics that you would like us to cover as part of the DSL conference. We want these days to be as relevant and useful to you guys as possible. So if you're picking up stuff in your teams or in your areas and think, actually, we need to know a little bit more about this and what's going on, please let us know and we will endeavour to cover it as part of the conference. If we can't cover it as part of the conference, we will look to do it in one of the further network meetings on our online sessions, but it will be really helpful if you've got any ideas of things that you think would be useful. So there's lots of stuff coming up from a partnership perspective in 2025. We've got the launch of some key strategies, the first of which being young in North Yorkshire, which we like to think of as kind of the roots from which all of our other strategies grow. We've also got work later on in the year where we'll be updating our early help strategy, and we'll be launching our harmful sexual behaviour strategy, which Steph's going to be talking about in a few minutes. We'll be taking a little bit of time looking at the self-harm and suicide ideation toolkit, which is going to be reviewed, with new toolkits in development looking at neglect. And again, we've already talked about this in previous slides, but looking at kind of capturing the voice of the child and what we really mean by the voice of the child. We've got some big events coming up in 2025. I've already mentioned the Designated Safeguarding Lead Conference, and we've got Safeguarding Week coming up in June. That's always an amazing week with lots of free safeguarding events that cover right across children and adults, and it's something we do with our partner local authorities. So we've got York, East Riding, different local authorities. So there's a wealth of stuff on there that you can access for free. We're in the stages of putting the programme together, so that will probably be later in April when we will get that programme out to you. But as always, we'll send it round to you. It'll be on our website, and the links will be there for you to book on. You guys are kind of getting hot off the press knowledge that we are having a child exploitation conference this year in June. So again, I'm really pleased that we're going to be launching all the details for that as part of our Child Exploitation Awareness Day on the 18th of March, but I'll touch on that on the next slide. And as always, we have our monthly learning events. So you know these are ones you can access on your lunch break at once a month, and we cover some key safeguarding topics for you. We've already looked at young people and vaping, so we have the slides and the resources on the website for that. Claire's going to be doing Growing Up in North Yorkshire on Wednesday. So again, if you need that kind of more comprehensive look at what Growing Up in North Yorkshire and the survey results are over an hour, please dial in, or we can access the recording afterwards. We will use the learning events to launch our strategies and toolkits, so we can go over those in a little bit more detail for you. And we will be looking at the learning from reviews as well and sharing those. Hannah, do you just want to touch on the education subgroup?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So for those of you familiar with our multi-agency safeguarding arrangements, we've got a new published version of those arrangements now on our website. You'll see in that we now have an education subgroup. So the purpose of that subgroup is to really support the meaningful involvement of education in the strategic arrangements when it comes to safeguarding children. So the idea of attendees being there is to think about how they can be involved in the development of strategies, practice guidance, and that kind of strategic work of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership. We really kind of recognise that we need to make sure we've got a really broad group, and making sure that we've got representation from education in its kind of broadest sense. So people that want to join the group are welcome to. There's no sort of pressure in that. If you can't come 1 month, you're still welcome to come. One term, you can still come the next term. So yeah, if people just want to drop something in the chat if you'd like to be part of that group, and then we'll pick that up. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. So I've already mentioned about this, but we do have Child Exploitation Awareness Day coming up on the 18th of March. So as a partnership, we're really proud to support this. This is a national campaign that's run by the charity, the National Working Group, and it's something that we like to get involved in pretty heavily every year to just kind of raise awareness and get people talking about child exploitation. So, so what you will receive next week, we will be adding it to our website, and I will add it to things like the red bag and contact partners with it. Is we've done like a communications package with some of the key messages, things that you can add to your newsletters, things that you can put on your social media feeds and stuff like that. And we've also shared some events and resources. So some of our partner organisations are putting on learning events through the week. Obviously, things like the National Working Group have put things on as well. And we will be using that as our launch pad for our event in June. So I'm hoping the booking link will be part of that comms package with the confirmed date on there as well. I just wanted to kind of raise awareness. I think most people are aware now of our practitioner forum. It's going from strength to strength as the months go on, really. But this is something we developed sort of the back end of 2024 as a result of some consultation events that we held last summer. And it's really about kind of the fact that we genuinely recognise the wealth of knowledge and expertise frontline practitioners bring to safeguarding practice and multi-agency working across North Yorkshire. So what we've developed is a frontline practitioner forum, and we meet every 6 weeks for an hour via Teams. And it's just that sort of safe space for frontline practitioners to come together with us as a business unit, and just kind of talk about how we can look at improving practice, things like sharing key messages. So the last couple of sessions, we've looked at things like the partnership website and how we can kind of make it as impactful as possible for frontline practitioners. And people have come back with some amazing ideas that we've acted on. The last one was really interestingly around looking at how we share the learning from our safeguarding practice reviews and how we can do that in the most impactful way. So again, we're going to take the feedback from that and think about the different ways we can format that learning, and we'll also look at upcoming publication of reviews. We will do a really short video as well that you can kind of share in your team meetings or kind of do in your own learning time. And coupled alongside that, we will have some kind of questions for reflection. So when you're looking through the learning and kind of picking it up, it'll be a chance to kind of think about what it means from your own practice. The practitioner forum is open to any frontline practitioner. We have a really lovely representation from education already, but we will always love more to join us. So if you would like to be part of the practitioner forum, please pop your email in the chat and I will add you to the distribution list. Again, like what Hannah was saying with the education group, there's no kind of obligation to come to every single one because we know that people are really busy, but you will kind of get those emails and the invites, and then you can dib into the ones that you're able to join us for. So yeah, if you're interested, please pop your name in the chat and I will gather those up. Final slide from us before I hand over to Steph. As always, this is a useful one in terms of QRs where you can access our monthly e-bulletin, our procedures, practice guidance and 1 minute guides, and our training page as well. And then, like I say, our YouTube channel and some of our social media accounts. But that's it as a business unit. I'm going to hand over to Steph, who's going to talk you through the harmful sexual behaviour work.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kat. So as Kat has said, I'm here to talk to you about our ongoing project with regard to harmful sexual behaviour. And we thought now would be a really good time because we're imminently launching a new area on our website, which I'll talk about more later, and some toolkit as well. So now will be a good time to tell you about where we've been and where we're going with this project. So next slide, please. Okay, so why the need for this? Well, as you'll be more than aware, as DSLs, keeping children safe in education outlines responsibilities of schools and college in safeguarding our children and young people from harmful sexual behaviour. As you'll well know, that goes to your policies, education of pupils, reporting systems, staff training. But I think more than that, we all would have seen an emergence of harmful sexual behaviours, both in terms of policy and legislation and general societal changes as well. As we know, things are changing online, the use of the internet, the rise in you're talking about healthy relationships, identifying them, misogyny, internet pornography, all that sort of thing. So it's all a bit of a mixture, and we at the partnership realised that we need to take a really strong look at this, more so to understand what harmful sexual behaviour looks like across North Yorkshire, across the patch in North Yorkshire, to help address it and support families and practitioners to support families with this, to understand the scale of it as well, so we can respond appropriately and put the right support in place for practitioners, but also to extend that understanding as well, so that practitioners can understand what harmful sexual behaviour is and what it isn't. As many of us will know, it exists on a continuum. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. So next slide, please, Kat. So what did we do? So we asked the NSPCC to come in and audit processes. So it's a multi-agency approach across partners across the whole of North Yorkshire. Some of you may have been involved in the audit that the NSPCC did. We wanted it to be independent, which it was. And like I said before, we wanted to look at the existing systems and processes and what the pathways of support look like. And this work that we did with the NSPCC really informed the strategy that we've put into place. So next slide, please, Kat. So this is just a timeline of where we've been. We've mentioned some of this already. So there was a launch event by NSPCC last January. The audits were sent out, and then the audits were received back in. That information was then disseminated to partners. And what's really, really positive is the NSPCC found a real willingness to improve and a real understanding across partners of multi-agency working, and really, really pointed out some really positive practice. From this, we set up a task and finish group to define priorities and actions aligned with those priorities. And now, bottom right-hand side of the timeline that you can see, we're at implementation. So next page, please, Kat. Okay, so there's a lot of information on this page, so I'll do my best to pick it out as much as I can. So really, we're looking at the highlighted information in blue, and in your own time, if you're able, you can go and look at this. So what were the key findings from the audit? Well, as you can see here, it was split down into 5 different areas. That's what the NSPCC do: responses, prevention, assessment, interventions, and development. And there was really a strong identification of key themes, and really it kind of has like an almost back to basics feel to it. As you can see from the blue, there was a lot identified that was positive in terms of good evidence of PHSE education in schools and working together well. What really came out from the audit was in some areas a lack of consistency across the patch. And as you can see there, really we're talking about things like knowledge of how to intervene at the lower level of harmful sexual behaviour. So if you're looking at the Hackett continuum, you'd be looking at around green and amber, what those behaviours are, what they mean, the context of those behaviours. And in some places, there was a need to support practitioners in understanding this better, but really, like I said, to have this consistent approach and access to specialised training. So next slide, please, Kat. So that moves us on to our strategy. I won't labour on this because who wants to hear about a strategy in depth, but broadly, we're calling it the US strategy, understand, scale, support, because that's exactly what we want to do across North Yorkshire. So improve the understanding of harmful sexual behaviour, like I said, what it is, what it isn't, to capture the scale across North Yorkshire, and most crucially, to provide the right support to practitioners on the front line. Okay, so next slide, please. So moving on, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to schools? At the very top here, where you can see keeping safe in education 2024, I've put this in, and we know, as mentioned already, that the guidance outlined schools and colleges should have clear policies in place, as we said. As a side note on this, I've included this in because if you go on the Safeguarding Partnership website, and we can provide a link for you, there's a sample child protection policy on there, which recommends that all staff read information in keeping children safe pertaining to sexual violence and harassment. So that's part 5 and Annex B. And just as a kind of note here, and I'm sure you're doing so already, but if you're not checking that what is stated in your child protection policy aligns with what you're doing, and that's recorded as well. So I've just bobbed that in to kind of bring that up while we're talking about harmful sexual behaviour. And like I said, if anybody wants to look at the sample policy, we can link to that. But kind of going on from there and keeping children safe in education, as well as the staff training, the induction, the age appropriate education, we've really looked at providing information to support schools in line with that. And also something Claire was talking about earlier with regard to the information that's come from growing up in North Yorkshire, really about how to implement a whole school support system. So what we've done is, bearing that in mind, we've produced a toolkit. And the toolkit will be launched next month. There'll be events surrounding that, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we've been really, really lucky that we've had key schools that have tested out the toolkit for us, to which we're eternally grateful, to understand that it's kind of hitting the mark and it's what you need and what you want. So like I say, the toolkit comprises of a searchable document. It's kind of like a dip in, dip out document. So if you've got a question with around harmful sexual behaviour, so if it's understanding for someone whose everyday role perhaps isn't safeguarding, it's a dinner lady, or it's a TA, or it's someone like that, they can understand what it is, what it isn't. It will reference links that go away from our website for people like the Lucy Faithful Foundation and the NSPCC, but it will also give kind of guidance on what is a sexualised behaviour, as well as things like the importance of context, how to support children initially, and kind of crucially, the routes of support, should you not know where to go or what to do. It focuses on both harmful sexual behaviours in person and in the virtual world as well, because that's really, really important. And it focuses on healthy relationships, really from the cradle to the grave. So we worked a lot with early years providers as well. And the toolkit is actually for practitioners and parents and young people themselves. And like I say, the really strong strand in that is about healthy relationships. And we talk about how parents can encourage healthy relationships. So young people don't get to high school and kind of not know what's appropriate, so they can understand, you know, how they can report concerns, all that sort of thing. So to go on about the toolkit, we also have videos as well. So that's a video that Bernardo's have provided for us, because they did a webinar around child sex abuse and harmful sexual behaviours. We've also created our own videos, which are scenario based. So as practitioners, you can show them to your teams and they can have a look at them. They can have a discussion around what they think a harmful sexual behaviour looks like. And again, taking all that sort of stuff about context and age and stage and all that sort of thing. And also we have videos from police as well to include in that. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we have in our toolkit, because we have an awful lot to it. Oh, and also as well, like I mentioned earlier, it mentions things like, you know, what to have in terms of your policy as well. It also mentions how to adopt a whole school approach. So we really hope it covers everything that you may need. But again, we're really, really happy to have feedback on that. So kind of going on from that, I'll talk more about this in the next couple of slides, but we will have events to launch the toolkit and a brand new area of the website as well that you can go to. So next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of this already, or I've talked about a lot about it already. So how is this going to be implemented in schools? So like I said, the toolkit is really there to aid practitioners in the identification of behaviours, giving really practical tips and resources, as well as step-by-step guidance, and crucially where to go for support and to talk through concerns that you have. And again, saying, you know, as part of this, schools have really been an essential part of the toolkit. This guidance is really being developed based on feedback from many of you. So thank you very much. The feedback has been really positive. We've had some schools that want to use it as part of induction, and we've had a month-long consultation on this. And just to be really clear, the idea of the consultation is not just to ensure that we're getting it right as a partnership, but crucially that we're listening to you and giving you the support that you and your teams need. So when this comes out, if it isn't quite hitting the mark, please do come back to us. You've got the NYSCP email address, or through the practitioner forum should you be a member, and we'll keep evaluating it and working on this. Sorry, Kat, you can go on to the next slide. The next slide for now and next, please. Perfect, thank you. So I've talked about it already. Where are we now? We've had our month-long consultation with schools, community groups, police, early years, school improvement, practitioners forum. The strategy that you briefly saw is at our executive group for sign-off, which will happen imminently. Next, like I've said, the website will be updated. You'll know about that. Our supporting scenario videos will be signed off as part of the toolkit. We're having a launch event next month, which is multi-partner. So our next lunchtime learning event is around the harmful sexual behaviour toolkit. We'll be going into that in more depth. And crucially and really excitingly, this is the first phase of many. This is very much an ongoing project. The next stage is to look at further training, to continue to evaluate what has and hasn't worked and what that ongoing support looks like, as well as having learning themed audits with regard to harmful sexual behaviour, which are very much in the pipeline, and kind of looking at continuous work on this as the risks change and evolve, as they inevitably will. So I appreciate that's very quick. That's harmful sexual behaviour. Please do get booked on via NYES to the learning event next month, April the 4th, I think it is, and we can go into this in a lot more detail. Likewise, any questions either on or offline, I'm really happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any questions for Steph, please do pop them in the chat. But to make sure we get you away for 3:30, I'm going to move on now and invite Helen to come and join us and talk about the poverty proofing in work.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Helen Ingle. I'm one of the public health managers in the public health team at the council. So I'm just going to give an update on the poverty proofing in schools work that's been going on for the last couple of years or so. My colleague Philippa Selstrom, who was one of our public health managers, led on this work up to December last year. So she left her role in the council in December. So I've picked this up and I'm now leading on the sort of child poverty and poverty proofing work. So just be updating on the development of this guide that we are in the middle of finalising for schools, which is called Action on Poverty, a Schools Guide, Creating Inclusive Learning Environments for All Pupils in North Yorkshire. Next slide, please. So just a reminder about the levels of child poverty in the UK. You've got some stats there for UK, for England, Yorkshire and Humber. For North Yorkshire, it's around 21% average of children living in child poverty. Obviously, that varies greatly across the county, as you can see there for the different areas. And each of those bar charts shows the percentage and the numbers. So if we look at Scarborough, that is 5,561 children, and that represents 28%. So 28% of children in Scarborough are living in poverty. So Harrogate there on the right has got quite a lower percentage, but high numbers because it's obviously a big population area. So roughly about 9 children in an average classroom of 30 pupils will be living in poverty. But on top of that, there will be a lot of other children who are in families who are facing financial hardship and will struggle with some of the costs associated with being at school and doing activities. Next slide, please. We also know that children living in poverty are more likely to struggle with mental health problems, poor physical health, such as low birth weight. Obesity levels tend to be around double in the more deprived areas than the least deprived areas. More likely to have chronic conditions, things like asthma and so on. They're also more likely to underachieve at school and have employment difficulties in adult life and be affected by antisocial and criminal activity and experience lower social mobility and social deprivation. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a reminder, some of you may remember us. We came to the DSL conference last September. Myself and Philippa ran some workshops there, which we had some great attendance, great engagement. So thank you all who came to those and engaged and gave us feedback on this work. So it's a really good workshop. So we delivered that last September. And really the project has been going on sort of, I think probably the back end of 2023 and through last year. So we managed to secure a small pot of money from the ICB through the Health Inequalities Programme. And with that, we commissioned a charity called Children North East to deliver this 12-month poverty proofing project. So they did 4 audits, poverty proofing the school day audits in 2 primary and 2 secondary schools in North Yorkshire. They also delivered 10 webinars, which was open to all North Yorkshire school staff. And they helped to co-produce the Poverty in Schools guide as well, which we're finalising now. So on top of that, the council, we also worked with the Child Poverty Action Group, and Doncaster Council had done some similar work around this and were very kind to share their resource as well. So we just wanted to acknowledge that as well. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a overview of the timescale, really. We obviously shared the draft guide in September at the DSL conference. Since then, we've sought some feedback from other partners like the Healthy Schools team, the Feast team, Safeguarding Children's Partnership. It was presented to in December. So been working on those amendments, incorporating feedback from partners, and then it's been with the design team recently to get it better designed. So presenting it at the webinars today, and then we'll be doing final amends. And then from March onwards, we'll be disseminating it to schools. We do see the guide as a working document. We'd really welcome feedback. How easy is it to use, to implement, to have impact in schools? That's the whole point of it, that it helps you to identify areas that you could work on to poverty-proof your schools, to make sure they're more inclusive for children living in poverty and low-income families. So that's the idea. So we will be doing that ongoing evaluation. We'll be asking for feedback, might be through surveys or at PSHE meetings or whatever. So please do share your thoughts on it. Next slide, please. We got some great feedback from people attending the workshop we did last September. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but some really great feedback. People seemed really interested, really keen on the content and wanted to have the guide. One of the suggestions that quite a few people said was to have a separate primary and secondary school version. We did discuss this, decided to keep it together as one document because a lot of the issues are relevant to both, but we have highlighted in the document where issues are more relevant to primary or secondary. Feedback also highlighted some of the challenges that you shared, such as staffing, who's going to lead on this, who's going to do it, where do we find the space for pre-loved uniforms or to have food parcels, things like that. The sort of cultural shift as well, the views of staff and parents. And one thing that's come through really strongly from our work has been the importance to involve pupils and staff and parents and do that consultation and find out what's right for your school. So yeah, next slide, please. So this is just to give you an overview of the 6 themes within the guide. So we've got our overall whole school approach, in school and home learning resources, food, uniform, additional opportunities like trips and prom and things like that, and support for pupils and families. So under each theme, there's a self-assessment tool, so you can go through that. It's just a sort of checklist to see which of those issues are priorities for your school. There's also top tips and suggestions of practical actions, so you can look at those and think, oh yeah, actually that's something we could try in our school. There's also then a separate action plan template for the whole document, which you can transfer your actions onto if you want to. So the actual guide will be a PDF document, but the design team have said that they can make the tables within that editable if you want to fill those in. But the Healthy Schools team have said to us that schools often like to have separate documents that are on Word, that are easy to complete and amend and save and share and that sort of thing. So we will produce some separate Word versions of the templates as well. So I hope that will be okay. Next slide, please. So just an example, this is one of the themes is food. And I guess just to highlight that lots of the suggestions in the guide might become common sense. There might be things you're already doing. The idea of the guide is just to help you to assess yourself, or look at new ideas and say, well, are we doing this? Is this something we could do? And find out what's right for your school. So It's just some of the examples here, looking at providing a breakfast club, which there's a link there to our breakfast club leaflet. So there are lots of links in the document as well, so hopefully to other resources and websites and things. So there's advice there about setting up breakfast clubs. Obviously there's a national pilot going on as well at the moment, but that's something you might think about. Also sharing details of the feast programs, the holiday activities and food program, if you're not already sharing that. Making sure that your practice around free school meals is non-stigmatizing, so making sure that the pupils aren't identifiable in any way, there's not a tick box against the name, that when they're on school trips that they're not identified as having free school meals, so maybe get some cheap lunch boxes in, maybe connect with your local food bank or look at developing a food pantry. The Healthy Schools team can support with that. And just sharing information with schools about food insecurity support. Make sure school food costs are really clear to parents for primary school and also for secondary, for those pupils coming in who are on free school meals, so that they know exactly how much things cost, so they're not anxious about not having enough money on their account, things like that. Next slide, please. So this is our suggested methods. What we wanted to do was not have a guide that schools look at and think, gosh, that's so long, where do we start? We haven't got time for this, and put it on the shelf. So we wanted to try and make it as easy as we can. There is a lot of information in there, but really this is our suggested way of how you might get started with it. So identify a champion, somebody who can act as the poverty in schools champion, or a couple of people, might be a pupil premium lead or somebody else. Share the guide with staff, ask them to read through it, or maybe have a meeting so you can talk through it, highlight some of the key points or your planned approach to implementation. Look at the themes, which identify which theme you want to start with, what's the most important priority, what areas do you think there are most gaps in. Complete the self-assessment tool for that theme, identify priority areas for action, and then fill in the action plan template if you want to use that, so you collate your actions for each theme. But if you want to do one theme at a time, that's fine. This is not something we're going to be checking up on or anything like that. It's really for you to use, but obviously we want to hear how it's gone, and then monitor progress against actions and changes, and review feedback as well from staff, pupil and parents, carers. Next slide, please. We're nearly there. Yeah, just to show you this is what a self-assessment tool or checklist looks like within the guide. So it'll just have those sort of Likert scale of how much you agree or disagree, so you can decide what areas to work on, and then examples of how the top tips and practical actions will be laid out there. Next slide, please. So next steps with this is we will be disseminating to schools once it's fully finalised and designed. We will send it out probably via Healthy Schools email addresses, through the red bag, network meetings, school briefings. We could do a recorded webinar or a live webinar. Really would appreciate any of your feedback on what would be the preferred way for you to get this. What's the best way for us to communicate? You can put a comment in the chat, or you can email me. My email's on the next slide, but we'd welcome any thoughts on that. We're then going to look at how we might incorporate some of this into the Healthy Schools Award programme, and also then obviously want to engage with schools and see how you've got on with it, any challenges you faced and so on, just so we can amend it and hopefully make it more user friendly. Next slide, please. So that's it. Thanks everybody. I hope that's okay for a quick update on that, and please do let me know if you've got any thoughts or comments or ideas around this work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Thanks, Kat.
Right, Leslie, I will pass over to you for our last slot of the day.
No problem there. Thanks everyone. I appreciate everyone's probably sort of slumbering into the coffees and the chocolate biscuits by now, the last presentation of the day. So I'll quickly move on to these slides in relation to what the delivery of Prevent looks like across North Yorkshire. I'm Leslie Graham, the Senior Development Officer with a remit around counter-terrorism, hate crime and community cohesion. I work within the Community Safeties team for North Yorkshire Council. So this presentation is really just to give you a very quick overview of how Prevent is delivered and what groups are there across the county for you to engage with. So from the duty coming into effect in 2015, we've always had a strategic partnership board, and we previously had 7 local Prevent groups which were within the districts and the boroughs. Following the merger of the North Yorkshire Council and the local authorities across the districts and the boroughs, we've now pulled together 3 local Prevent groups which cover the west, central and east areas outlined there on the slide. It sort of encompasses some of the Skipton, Ripon, Richmond, Northallerton and outer areas of the west. Harrogate, Knaresborough and Selby and Ainsty are the central, and east covers Scarborough, Whitby, Thirsk and Malton, and also including Easingwold. The strategic board there has been, as I say, in existence since 2015. It has the oversight of the Prevent arrangements across the county, and it also agrees the counter-terrorism local profile. And this really directs and influences our delivery in North Yorkshire and York around mitigating risks outlined within that CTLP. It also has the overall strategic oversight of each of the local action plans and is currently chaired by the Assistant Chief Exec for North Yorkshire Council, and the Deputy Chair is the Assistant Chief Constable for North Yorkshire Police. The local groups are chaired at the moment by the Partnership Manager for North Yorkshire Council and the Community Safety and CCTV Managers. So they all sit within my team, and I support each of those groups, so the strategic board and also the local groups, as part of my remit. These groups have been in existence since the summer of last year. So they're still very early development stages, and as I say, the membership is quite vast because of the size of the boundaries, but this is really an excellent opportunity to sort of network and keep up to speed with any changes around Prevent or any questions or support that you may need. Move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I've mentioned there the counter-terrorism local profile. For those who are on this call who are not aware of what this document is, it is managed strategically, mentioned by the Prevent Partnership Board. It's a multi-agency document and it's populated by our local intelligence. So what comes through from the local groups and our partners influences this document, as well as some of what the national trends and threats are coming through. It is a strategic document, so it doesn't give that complete assessment of what activities in the area, and obviously it's looking back over the last 12 months. It is populated and produced by Counter-Terrorism Police in North East, and the aims of the CTLP is to develop a joint understanding amongst local partners of those threats, vulnerabilities and risks relating to terrorism and non-violent extremism. It's also to provide information on which to base local Prevent programmes and action plans, so it's targeting our resources and looking at how we can target some of our comms as well. It's also looking at supporting the mainstream of Prevent activity into day-to-day activity, local government and partnership working, and also allowing targeted and proportionate use of shared resources. Moving on to the next slide. So the purpose of the group, I'm not going to read through all of these bullet points, and you will get these slides as well for information, but is around that effective coordination and looking at how our partners are managing our resources and how those action plans are being developed across each of the areas. Part of my role is to look at that consistency across each of the delivery, and also looking at that consistency for any actions as well. So looking at sharing good practice, what's working in one area, can we model that over into another area as well? well. It contributes to all of the CTLP, like I've mentioned previously, but from that CTLP, we actually now have to produce a situational risk assessment, and that's based on our Home Office benchmarking exercise. So this looks into a little bit more detail around what those local risks are and how we are going to mitigate those risks. So it takes into a bigger data set really in relation to how that picture looks for each of the areas. So we have a situation risk assessment for each of those local areas. Reduce and permissive environments. So that's looking at how we have policies in place, such as venue hire, to be able to potentially stop key speakers coming into our areas that might have that narrative around far right, for example. So it's just making sure that we have the right policies, the right guidance in place for staff, and that we do the right checks when we are approached to hire out our venues. It looks at community tensions and also those concerns within our communities. We've seen that being demonstrated with the riots in the summer, and looking at some of those local Facebook books, pages, and looking at how we can provide some decent comms to mitigate some of those risks and concerns. We've seen that from both the workforce as well as a community perspective. We get updates on hate crime reporting as well from North Yorkshire Police, so that gives another flavour and another layer to some of the concerns within those localities. We look at integration and community cohesion, and also around community engagement as well. So local events, how can we build that trust within our communities? How can we interweave some of our key messages as well across our communities to give them that reassurance? It's also part of information exchange. So again, when we're talking about populating that CTLP, it's looking at what's coming through. So from a school perspective, it's what are young people talking about? What are some of the concerns come through, even from the parents, and feeding some of that information in, so we can look at some emerging themes, and we can potentially then look at how we can target some resources and look at opportunities to develop some local projects as well. I'm not going to talk anymore in relation to some of those details there, because it's a lot about the CTLP. It's a lot about what I talked about, reduced permissive environments, and it's about sharing key comms and information as well. Moving on to the next slide. So from identifying a gap, wake up call for those on the call who are not aware of this project. It's been around for some time now. It's probably pre-COVID actually. It's funded through the OPFCC, and it's open to all secondary schools. It's a free resource. Some may have already accessed this, and it's really sort of that pre-prevent work with young people at risk of being radicalised or committing hate crime or showing that negative racial behaviour. So it works with a cohort of young people, maximum of 12, from the ages year groups of 9 to 13, and North Yorkshire Youth deliver this project within the schools, and it's about providing that counter narrative, really unpicking some of those attitudes and behaviours of what they're seeing on social media, what they may be picking up through other avenues and other platforms as well. So as I say, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this again is something that if we identify a risk and a gap in some of our resources, we can look at how we develop some projects to help support either within education settings or within our communities as a whole. So that's something just to bear in mind. And as I say, this stems as well through the referral processes into channel. We see some of the gaps there, and looking at how we can obtain some external funding. At the moment, the Home Office do have some funding there around prevent radicalisation, which I am looking to access, and looking at some training opportunities as well, longer term, say over the 12 to 18 months, that may be of use across education settings as well as other areas of work. On to the next slide. So really looking at what I've disclosed there, the benefits of attending. From your perspective, I will see that regular update on current risks and threats. So the CTLP is shared at these groups. We get regular updates, quarterly updates from counter-terrorism policing, which will go into a little bit of detail as well. It's also sharing that local intelligence information. So you also have some key contacts there as we're around the table. The membership is really vast, and these are also supported by the community safety hubs as well. So we talk about the CTLP, we populate the CTLP, we have a workshop in relation to how we can get information into that document, and we also look at how we can develop and develop and sort of break down that situational risk assessment into what that means as local actions. I've touched on local projects, for example. Again, we can identify such projects and look at how we get some funding, and this can be shaped by yourselves. Networking opportunities. I think it's great to understand what support you have there in the wider sort of reach of partners. We also share free training opportunities and resources as well. So there is a training offer across York and North Yorkshire. We have prevent training for education settings, and we also look at ad hoc training sessions as well around emerging themes. Move on to the next slide. I've just pulled this slide together really just around the Regional Prevent Coordinator from the Department of Education. For those who aren't aware, there is a specific dedicated person as Chris Sabenga. He is our link into the Department of Education and offers a round of support to schools from a reactive point of view, as well as looking at a focused support. There is online training, and he does feed this information up into the contest, regional contest board, and also equivalent boards across the region. So there is a newsletter, there is free training for designated safeguarding leads, and as I say, there's some examples of what can be offered if you feel you need to ask him for any support or advice. There is a slide that has his contacts on at the end of this presentation as well. So this slide, he's just showing there's the scan code there for the Prevent newsletter from the Department of Education. If you're not already signed up to this, I would really encourage you to do so. As I say, there is free training on there, there's governor training on there, and there's some sort of ad hoc training around gaming and Prevent as well. So again, it just gives you that overview of what's coming through, and also support you with any assessment that you need to undertake. From North Yorkshire and York training perspective, on our partnership page, we have the training over the next 12 months. So again, if you click onto that link, it will take you to a page where we have the Prevent for Education settings training. We also have introductory guide to incel subculture training, and anything else that's sort of coming through for the next sort of 6 to 12 months. We will look at bringing in trainers around that specific topic. We also promote Act Early and Educate Against Hate. For those who haven't already accessed this, these are really good resources as well to share in the classroom, but also to point to as any source of information. I think coming up to the last slide now. Yeah, this slide really is just around useful contacts. I've shared there a slide on Chris Sabenga's role. As I say, please do get in touch with him if you do need any support. I know that he's reached out to contacts within North Yorkshire Council to share. He is there to be able to help with any assessments that you need to do or any action plans as well. Prevent concerns and referral, Sergeant Ben Halliwell is our contact. Open again to any sort of, if you have concerns about any young people, if you just want to talk to his team, just to sort of make sure that you know that there's a concern there that you want to put a referral, and he will talk you through that process, and also give you any sort of signposting if need be. And myself for the local Prevent groups. If anyone is interested and not already signed up to these local groups, please do get in touch with me. It's good to, even if you're on a circulation list, to just receive the minutes and get an update of what's actually being discussed in your local area. And if you do need any additional support, then please, like I say, get in touch with me.